Yeah, okay. So, as you will see, hopefully, there will be a few points where I will connect to some of the topics that Nick covered today, and some of the topics that will also be covered in the last couple of lectures. Mainly, I guess, today I want to give you a bit of a historical overview of what I think are some of the most important advances if we want to consider, approaches to a science of agency. There will be basically examples. They will not be covering the entire history of all of the possible approaches, but they will be hopefully, useful in connecting to some of the ideas that you already pointed at towards yesterday, pretty much. So the cybernetics movement, and perhaps ideas of minimal cognition and other things you might already be familiar with. Some of the stuff that I mentioned in the talk yesterday about robotics will also come back, and we will look at that more in detail. So the outline is quite simple. I will try and go through different kinds of systems, living systems, cognitive systems, minimally cognitive systems, autonomous systems, adaptive systems, systems with goals, and we'll try to classify things into different categories. You don't have to agree with me. I'm not sure that I agree 100% with what I'm presenting today. Maybe tomorrow will change my mind. But the point is that, we might want to start asking certain questions. Something that is very important all throughout this talk, and that I will not be repeating, say, very regularly, and I will just say this one time. So Nick, I think, was very careful in articulating how different approaches to agency sometimes implement robots, sometimes model robots, sometimes they model something else. Sometimes they want to model living systems, sometimes they want to talk directly about living systems. So there are very different levels of commitment in all of this discussion about agency. I will not go through all of it. I will not be telling you about each single system. Oh, this is a model of a system, but if you look at it, that's for you to think about. So I will just put everything in a big soup, and I will just, allow you to then consider, what your conclusions are, given all of these different examples. So the idea is that at some point we should be able to, define, or at least, try and, put some, some educated guess into where agency might be when we think about systems with goals, systems without goals, etc., etc. But this will be, the very, very, very last part of this talk. So I will start by saying we might want to agree that living systems, life as we know it on Earth, is probably a good example of agency. I would say living systems, they are probably agents. So I put there some example. Let's say plants. We might want to consider, bacteria, fungi, animals, whatever other example you have in mind. Just some example. Yeah. Then I want to consider artificial life systems. So artificial life is the science of life as it could be. Is the science of not life as we know it currently, but other forms of life that we currently don't understand, but we might want to consider as life. By that, I mean, maybe life in a simulation. If you've never heard of this game of life, I will be covering something later, so don't worry. Or it could be life, in a completely different medium that we still haven't considered. Again, I will have some examples later. This is just about, let's think about life outside of, life on Earth, and then let's try to see what's actually still there, and whether we are interested in calling that, phenomenon, something that has to do with agency. Here, I will start, with some very strong assumption. And, I expect some disagreement, and it would be fine to disagree. I'm saying that cognitive systems are a superclass of living systems. So what do I mean by that? I mean that every living system to me is cognitive, but there are cognitive systems that don't need to be living systems. And you might want to disagree, and that's great. I might also disagree with myself if you ask me again tomorrow. So you might want to say, I want, cognitive systems to just be something like this. So, there might be living systems that are not cognitive. Well, that's great. We should talk about it. I'm not denying that. I think I would be very interested, having a conversation about this. But for now, I will keep it simple and say, well, all cognitive systems, cognitive systems are a superclass of living systems. An example, again, let's see how much you agree with that. I'm exemplifying true AI. And what do I mean by true AI? I mean an AI that actually develops for its own good. An AI that develops some form of intelligence without necessarily having been trained by humans, or without necessarily serving humans. And that thing I could imagine being on some, computer, on some, maybe strange medium we haven't considered, like some nebula in some obscure part of the universe. Maybe there is true AI there. I don't know. And I would say that doesn't need to be living. And, I'm happy for you to disagree. Let's see what comes out of this. One level above, autonomous systems. So Izuka-san is not here today, but he wrote an amazing paper, 2008, I think, with Ezekiel Di Paolo about a notion of autonomy that I'm trying to use here. I'm very happy also that Nick, already introduced us to a stronger notion of autonomy in her talk earlier. Because, if you talk about autonomy in a common, say, in the common language, we can talk about autonomous cars, we can talk about autonomous driving, we can talk about autonomous robots. That's not what I mean. By autonomous systems, I mean systems that basically, do things for their own good, and doing things is what defines their own individuality. So this is a very strong assumption that I'm making here. You might say, well, that's too strong. Okay, that's the assumption I'm making. So I'm saying that all of the systems that I care about inside these autonomous systems actually determine their own individuality. What's an example of that? Maybe it's a bit exotic, but hurricanes. Hurricanes, I think they are autonomous systems. They follow gradients, heat gradients, and they basically make up their own existence by the way they behave. There's a nice paper I will point to later where you might want to check this out. Adaptive systems. With adaptive systems, I mean systems that are not necessarily autonomous, so they don't need to determine their own individuality, but they can adapt to some external disturbance from the environment. They don't need to generate their own individuality, so it means that we can build them. So I would say a robot is an adaptive system. If it can avoid a wall, it's an adaptive system. If it can follow a light, it's an adaptive system. But, it didn't emerge, it didn't come out of, the way it behaves does not define its own individuality. I built it, and it has a task, and it adapts to some disturbances from the environment. So I would say that's an adaptive system. More general than that, I'm assuming there are systems with goals. And I would say systems with goals don't necessarily adapt. So there might be a goal, but they don't necessarily have any mechanism to adapt to disturbances. And here, hopefully, you'll be a bit surprised if I tell you that a ball rolling is a system with a goal. I can write down the Lagrangian for this system, and I can set up a variational optimization problem where I tell you the ball rolling down is minimizing this function. And I can do that with time, I can do that with space, I can do that with a combination of the two, I can do that with any variable, and I can set up for a large class of problems in physics, a purely minimization process. So some quantity is being minimized, and I call that a goal. But the goal doesn't adapt. If you push it out of the trajectory, it doesn't adapt. It just gets out of the trajectory and it stays there. More general than that, I would say systems. There are some systems for which I cannot write down any strange form of goal. And, you know, this might be a bit simplistic, but I would say dynamical systems. There are classes of dynamical systems for which that are not necessarily bound to any physical, say, reality. They're just some mathematical construct. And I can tell you, well, this thing evolves, and you will not be able to write down that this thing has a goal. Unless you tell me, well, the goal is to evolve. Yeah, it's a bit, I don't know, it's a bit too thin for me to call it a goal, I feel. Okay, so as I promised, a couple of references here. Don't worry too much. I'm leaving them here so that you can check them later. I particularly like, I guess, this McGregor-Virgo, life and its close relatives. They are the ones bringing out hurricanes as, you know, examples of systems out of thermodynamic equilibrium that actually have some pretty interesting properties. But they are not alive, but they have quite some interesting properties that are interesting, I guess, for at least people that are trying to study life. Again, don't worry too much. Also, I guess for reference, I should say that a lot of, you know, the parts that came into the previous slide come from this traditional classification done 1943 about, you know, teleology and, you know, how to classify different classes of systems depending on whether they are active, passive, they have goals, they don't have goals, they adapt, they don't adapt, etc., etc. It's a bit different, but yeah, I wanted to mention that, yeah, it is not, you know, I'm not pulling that out of a magic hat. Okay, so pretty much now I will just try and, you know, entertain you with a bunch of examples. Some of them you will probably know, some of them hopefully no, and then we'll just, you know, go from there. So now I will basically go in the reverse direction. I will start from, you know, the general systems, and then I will try to go down and give some more concrete examples of, you know, interesting, I guess, systems that we might want to consider if we want to understand where to draw a line, if we can draw a line. That's very important, between agents and non-agents. And if we don't want to draw a line, why? Okay, so dynamical system, you know, it's a pretty simple concept. We have some quantity that evolves over time, so we need to define a space. I mean, discrete dynamical systems, they're pretty easy. We need to define a space, we need to define an evolution function, and then the evolution function brings me from one element in this space to another element in this space. That's it. If we want to consider more elaborate dynamical systems, maybe we have to add a few things, but qualitatively, the idea is still the same. There's not much that I can add there. This is an example of a pretty famous dynamical system, the Lorentz system with an attractor, a chaotic attractor. You can just start the system from a bunch of different initial conditions. And even if they are very close to each other, the trajectories will in general tend to diverge in certain areas of the state space and then reconverge to basically create this, this chaotic attractor. The equations are pretty simple in there. This is a continuous time system, but surely, you know, there's not much happening there. You know, you have some quantities, X, Y, Z evolving, and that's about it. You might say, oh, maybe this system is trying to go towards a goal. Well, yeah, maybe, but that's not a very interesting explanation. And I can surely find systems without attractors, and there you're left with basically no explanation. Like, you know, what's the goal of a system without an attractor? To not have an attractor? I don't know. That's a pretty boring goal, if you ask me. Okay, so where do we place that? I would say it's a system. In general, you have systems, dynamical systems that don't necessarily need to have a goal. I don't find that saying that these systems have goals is any more interesting than, saying that they don't have goals. Okay, next example. How many of you have ever heard of this digesting duck? Anyone? Okay, so this is an example from 1739, one of the first, I guess, modern automata. The Vaucanson tried to build okay, this is not a video from that time, of course, but this is a good example of a modern implementation of the original project. This is basically like a clock, okay? You have some gears inside, and this thing can basically look like a duck in some sense. It can, it looks like it's eating some food, and then you look inside and you see things happening, and it looks like it's digesting food. So the idea was to create, a duck that can eat and that can poop. Pretty simple. Okay, does this thing have a goal? I don't know. I mean, I think it is more interesting to try and attribute a goal to this system than it is to attribute a goal to an arbitrary dynamical system. Again, we might want to disagree there, but I don't know. I think it is more interesting to start thinking about goals in here. It is not adaptive, doesn't do anything. Like, if you push it a little bit to the side, doesn't do anything. If you move the food, doesn't do anything. If you move the place where it can poop, well, it doesn't stop. It will still poop this thing. It doesn't adapt. Yeah. But yeah, this is anyway a pretty interesting example, and almost 300 years old, and people were already, thinking about this kind of questions. Okay, one slide that I will leave here, and this is something that I'm hoping to mention in the last lecture. There is something called the duck test. You can check that on Wikipedia. Basically, if it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it probably is a duck. Well, clearly that's not true. I can build a lot of functions like into mechanical ducks, and it doesn't really get me a real duck. But the question is, how many functions would I have to build into, like, if I could map all of the possible functions of this duck, all of the possible things that a duck can do in a robot, would I be getting a real duck? I don't know. I'll leave it there. This is, by the way, generated by Stable Diffusion. I think I just put something like mechanical duck, transparent, show me the mechanisms or something. I had to try a few times, but I don't know, it looks pretty nice, but it's not real. I generated that with some, with a software. Okay, so where do we put that? I would say, okay, I'm interested in, thinking about this system as a system with goals. So it's not adaptive, but it might have goals. Or at least I may want to attribute goals to this system. Okay, what's next? Have you ever heard of the strand beasts before? I see some nodding. Yeah, good. Okay, for those of you who haven't, this I think is an amazing, as you might notice along the line, I'm not trying to go in chronological order. I'm not trying to tell you which one came first or whatever. I'm more interested in, classifying things for now. For those of you who haven't seen this, okay, well, the music is pretty nice. These things don't have engines. They're just some mechanical structure that uses wind on a beach to basically propel itself. So it looks like it's walking, and this artist is also very interested in making them look more and more living-like, so lifelike. Again, it's not very adaptive. If there's no wind, it doesn't do much. Cannot really say adapt if you push it a little bit out of the wing trajectory. But I think it, again, I'm more interested in considering this as something with a goal to walk. I don't know, you might say, well, you're looking too much into this. I don't know. I think this is more interesting to consider if I want to consider what goals are. Okay. I don't know. I think this is pretty nice. I always like to watch, a few minutes of this. There are, a lot of different shades. I think it's pretty amazing how he can put all of this together. Using different architectures in a way. Okay. So I will say this system has a goal. It's not adaptive, but it has a goal. Next, chatbots. This is something I mentioned yesterday, ChatGPT, let's say. But this is, old technology, like, at least like the idea of chatbots comes out probably in the 60s. First, I would say, maybe the system looks like it might have some goals. I doubt it, but, I might be persuaded if you try to come up with a good goal for this thing. But I would say it is not adaptive. Like, it doesn't really adapt. Like, once you put a word in, it will generate a flux of text, depending how long you want it to be. But, you cannot really change a word in the middle of what it's generating and then expect something else. Like, it's open loop in a sense. You put some text in and then, your hands are off. This thing will generate something. And then, sure, you can ask one question. Can you clarify this? Can you clarify that? But it doesn't really feel adaptive. Like, it's just, this thing just does its own thing. So I would put that into systems with goals, but not really adaptive. This is another example from yesterday.
I got my tools again.
I will not show it all, but this was the nice robot, like, doing all of this amazing moving around and, passing things to do the work. Amazing. One of you yesterday mentioned or asked me, like, do you think that's pre-recorded? And I would say yes. It's really hard to find information nowadays because they got caught like in 2018 and 19. They were generating similar videos, and then people realized they are all pre-recorded. There's no AI happening. So it's like, yeah, it's not that interesting now that you told me it's all pre-recorded. So now if you try to Google something like, Atlas, trick, Atlas, whatever, something, they basically created a bunch of articles that are twisting the meaning of trick, the meaning of, scam or whatever. So you're not going to find whether this thing is actually pre-recorded or not, and they will not tell you. My suspicion is that, yeah, it is still pre-recorded. I would strongly doubt there is some strong AI in there. Anyway, it was pre-recorded until 2 years ago for sure. That we know for sure. What do I mean by, pre-recorded? Well, it means that, again, like, if you perturb the system, it will not adapt. If I move like the box with the tools for this thing will not be able to move and pick up the box from a different position. It can only pick it up where it was programmed to pick it up. Anything that happens to this thing, yeah, as far as I can tell, there's no adaptation going on. So Atlas, system with goals, yeah, it did its thing, like, maybe it's solving a problem, that might be the thing, doesn't adapt. Okay, now, one of my favorite examples, World Governor, now we are in 1788, I think that's more or less the, I think that's the original designer list. So this is a pretty, I don't know, you might find this relatively. Okay. Can you lower a little bit? No. Yeah, because this is completely. No. There. Anyway, this is a steam engine. This World Governor basically it's a type of controller for the speed of a steam engine. So we are trying to control, how fast the steam engine will actually, make our car go, or, give us power to do some other task or something. It's a pretty nice example, say, of, technology from around, again, well, this is 250 years old. Okay, yeah. I can stop it like this at least. And I would say this is adaptive. And what do I mean by adaptive? Well, it means that, so a classical example, for example, let's say with this kind of controller, is that, I can put this controller, say, on a slope, and that actually will generate some weird rotation. Okay, well, in case you never heard of this, how does the control happen? Well, basically, we attach the engine to this part of the controller over here, and this thing will basically power the rotation of the rod to which these two fly balls are attached. So this thing will start rotating, and basically the more it rotates, the more these two balls will gain momentum, they will go up, and the more, this thing actually accelerates, the more then it tries to shut down the exhaust for the steam, which will basically slow down the engine. So it's basically trying to find the optimal output of steam that can keep the fly balls rotated at a constant speed. So constant speed of the fly balls equals constant output of steam. Now, if you put this on a slope, then the fly balls will not have a constant speed anymore, because now gravity will play a particular role in one direction but not the other. And the thing is, for this governor, up to some extent, it can adapt to that. So you can start, say, I don't know, you can put that on a slope, or you can attach, I don't know, more weight, or you can put some wind and, make the fly balls rotate faster. This thing can adapt. Very basic adaptation. I'm not talking about, crazy adaptation. It cannot move itself somewhere else, but it can do some level of adaptation. I would say at least it's more interesting from this perspective than ChatGPT. This can adapt more than ChatGPT, I would say, more than Atlas. And you might disagree with that, but yeah, let's talk about it. Okay, so as I mentioned, I believe this is an adaptive system. It has a goal to control an engine, and it adapts in some cases. Classical example, this time from cybernetics, Ashby's homeostat. Ashby was one of the leaders of the cybernetics movement in England, so the European side, and he was a psychiatrist, so he was interested in understanding the brain, while also, trying to build things that could help in, say, understand the brain. So this was an example of a thing that he was interested in, ultra stability. I will not cover that. But the idea was to have a robot that can show some level of homeostasis. So it could adapt to some things. Not everything, again, this was not, the idea was not to have a robot looking like a human, clearly. It was not to have a robot that behaves like a human. Can I show you that? But, it has some level of adaptation. It can do some stuff. This is just a sketch of the blueprint of the thing, because I think there is no video of this homeostat. So I will basically move to the next one, which I think actually has a video. I will put Ashby's homeostat in there. It's an adaptive system. It has some homeostasis. Not much more than that happening. The next example, as I promised, actually has a video. This is from Walter. Walter was a neurophysiologist, cybernetics again, and in this case, well, another robot, but in this case, it's more like a turtle. And this robot can follow lights or can get away from lights. It can solve some basic problems. Let's see if it gets, yeah. So this is actually an original video. This thing actually made it, I think, Scientific American or something, like, it was a pretty big deal at the time. People thought, oh my God, we have robots, we solved it, we understand intelligence, we understand cognition, we got it all. I don't know, maybe not. You can follow a light, you can put two of these next to each other and they will follow each other, they will maybe meet, they will look like, they are talking to each other, but honestly, yeah, I mean, we are still far from, I guess, like the complexity that we might be interested in. It's also pretty slow, it doesn't, I don't know. It's interesting, like, it's 1948, that's fine, but, I think we can do better than that. Anyway, why do I put that? I would say this is an adaptive system. Like, it was still built, it's not autonomous, it doesn't have any sort of, defining feature of its own identity. Writable vehicles, this is one of my favorite examples. How many of you, does anyone know about writable vehicles? Raise your hand, yeah, some hands, okay. Valentino Breitenberg, pronouncing this right, like, he was an Italian neuroscientist, actually did a lot of work on vision, and then at some point it just got completely off on a tangent and published this book, which I think is just an amazing book. Everyone should read this book. It's really tiny, really short, but I think it has some really, interesting takes on behavior. He called this book, Experiments in Synthetic Psychology. So he never built any robots, but he actually thought about ways to build robots that had very complicated behavior with really simple inner mechanisms. So literally, he was thinking, okay, I'm going to build a robot. I'm going to put two wheels, one engine on each wheel. And then I'm going to put two sensors in the front of the, like on the front side of the robot. And then I'm going to connect the sensors to the wheels. So one cable, one sensor, one wheel. And I'm going to experiment with different types of connections. So left sensor, left wheel, right sensors, right wheel, or maybe left sensor, right wheel, right sensor, left wheel. I'm going to cross them, or try, maybe some more complicated things that comes later in the book. But I think the most interesting part is the very beginning. There's even one robot that is just one wheel and one sensor. The first one, vehicle one, yeah. Anyway, here's just an example of a simulation. I mean, it's actually pretty easy, like, to build if you have some, I don't know, I used to do this with Lego Mindstorm. Like, it doesn't require a lot of programming, it doesn't require a lot of complexity. It's pretty easy, I guess, to see what is going on. Here we have two different kinds of robots. We have robots that get close to a light, and then we have robots that try to stay away from the light. And the principle is quite, I guess, straightforward. If your reading of the light, let's look at this vehicle A. So left sensor mapped to left wheel. If the reading of the light is higher, say on the left side, then we're going to have that the left wheel is spinning faster. So if the light is on my left and my left wheel is spinning faster than my right, I'm getting away from the light. Same, if the light is on the right-hand side, I'm getting away from it. If I cross the wires, now I have that the left sensor gives me a high reading, high luminosity, and now the right wheel is spinning faster. So I'm getting towards the light. That's it. The thing is, without telling you the mechanism, you might think, oh, this system, has a goal. It wants to reach the light, or it wants to stay away from the light. And you would be right. Perhaps I would say, yeah, you would be right. I think this system has a goal, maybe. And I would say it can adapt to some extent. Again, simple adaptations, like, you can push it out of the trajectory and it will still go towards the light or still go away from the light. Clearly, you can apply perturbations that are not so good. So, you can, I don't know, remove the wires. That's not good, but it can adapt to some extent. So, Brightenberg vehicles, adaptive, non-autonomous. Okay, now self-driving cars. Like, we talked about self-driving cars yesterday. We also thought about them, as possibly autonomous because, that's how some people call them, autonomous cars. Are they really autonomous? They are autonomous, I guess, in the way these people mean autonomous. They are not autonomous in the way I mean autonomous. So somebody still built the car. Like, autonomy is not the thing that is determining the identity of this car. I built the car, and then I'm saying that there is a system inside that is adaptive. So to me, this is an adaptive car. It's not an autonomous car. Also, a couple of funny examples of, the things that to me don't make it autonomous. So these are pretty old. Now they've been solved, I'm sure. So here you will find a link where, you can see people, if fixed gear bicycles, if you are standing on top of one and you want to stop, basically you need to cycle backwards. That's to slow down. And there was a person just standing, say, on a bicycle, going back and forth a little bit. And the Tesla did not know how to handle that, because the Tesla was just, told, okay, there is a bicycle, stay away from the bicycle, stop if you're too close. The bicycle was just on the side and the Tesla got close to it. This guy was playing with his bicycle and the Tesla was just, there, like, okay, what am I supposed to do? Stop moving, whatever, like, got too close, get away. It was a pretty funny story. I think this is, 8 years ago now, but I still remember that. So I wanted to introduce some examples of, the fact that, it really doesn't understand its own identity in a sense. It's just being programmed to do something. Second example, again, you will probably find that funny. There's a nice video. I'll leave it to you in case you want to check later. Tesla, it's adaptive, it's not autonomous, in my sense. What's autonomous in the way I mean autonomous? Well, I said hurricane. We can look at that, in more detail in the paper I left as a reference, or we can look at systems of this kind. This is a reaction diffusion system, a reaction diffusion simulation, a simulation of a reaction diffusion system. Here we just drop two chemicals, and then we just, we just embed like the, say the transformation of these two chemicals. This is an autocatalytic system, meaning that one of the two chemicals also acts as a catalyst, and so say a catalyst is also a product of this reaction, or a product is also a catalyst of this reaction, whichever way. This is quite interesting. I did some work on this before. There is a nice thesis by a guy in Tokyo that I consider, a masterpiece about this. There's a lot of complexity that comes out of these systems, and there are some shapes now, maybe they're not so evident, that show some interesting behavior. You have solitons, which are basically almost cells. They just stay there, they never die. You can bump into them, they will kind of move. They will only die, say, under very strong perturbations. There is a shape. Let me see if I can, if you can see it here. The first thing you saw there, like the little thing, like, sliding at the very beginning, that's called a U-skate. That's a stable pattern that basically can move in the system and can actually, it's quite robust. Yeah, the U-shaped thing is quite robust to a large class of perturbations, and it can avoid things. It can do, quite some interesting stuff. And, the identity of this system is actually determined by, in this case, I would argue, by the way this thing actually acts. So not moving or moving actually determines the very existence, the very identity of these systems. This is, perhaps controversial. The only formal study that I know of this kind of work is this PhD thesis. There are other related works, but I would say this is the most formal attempt that I know of characterizing this class of systems. I tried to do something, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. It's hard. So I think this is autonomous, but yeah, it's hard for me to show you mathematically what I mean. I will just leave it at that. I put 1952 as the beginning of these simulations because wait, who was it? Von Neumann? No. Turing patterns. So this is not a Turing pattern, but Turing actually had some ideas related to this class of simulations. Okay, so as I said, I would argue this system is autonomous. Now we are stepping into autonomy. Now, okay, oh yeah, sorry. This is a link in case you want to try. You can simulate this thing on your own. It's pretty nice. You can do that online without installing anything. Now we get to probably the example I will spend the most time on, because, well, partially because I put that in the in the abstract for this class, but also because I think this is a very well studied system by now. Game of life. Has anyone ever heard of the game of life before? Yeah. Okay, good. Let's see how noisy it is. Hopefully not so much. Okay. So we have a grid. We have cells. The cells can be on or off, white or black. And they have some pretty simple rules that I will show in a slide or two. And, the rules I want to stress they are really simple. We have one cell, and then we look around at the 8 cells around it. And then we just decide whether this cell is on or off in the next time step by checking how many cells around it are on or off. That's more or less it. And this is supposed to mimic more or less some principles of, life as we know it. So yeah, if there are too many things in this area, some of them will have to die. If there are not enough, well, things will die. If there are just enough, well, maybe things can survive a bit longer. That's more or less like the metaphor. Now, the thing about this is that, it's incredibly complex. The rules are really simple, but the output can be incredibly complex. It's a Turing complete system, meaning that in principle, you can compute anything on this as long as you have an infinitely large grid, which of course is not easy, but, just mentioning that. It doesn't follow the physics that we currently follow in our universe, in the sense that there is no conservation of mass, there is no second law of thermodynamics. There's a lot of stuff that is missing there, but that's what makes it interesting. It's almost what could systems look like in a different type of physics? This video is amazing. There's tons of videos about this. I think, there's a lot of stuff that we can learn from this kind of simulations. Just to, give you a very, I guess, general overview of the kind of studies that people do here. There is a lot of work in trying to classify the type of stable shapes that we can get out of this kind of system. The basic one, are pretty basic in a sense. A block. This block basically is a structure that just, as long as you don't perturb it, will just stay there, will not move, will not do anything. The blinker is a structure that would just would just move from horizontal to vertical, in states next to each other. The glider is a bit more interesting, and I will pay a bit more attention to that in the coming slides. And then, you can go a bit more complex. So you have this beehive, you have this loaf, this boat. There was a big thing about a spaceship that was discovered last year, I think, that is, incredible for some reason, but now I forgot the reason. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting system. As I mentioned, the rules are simple. If you have two If you have fewer than 2 live neighbors around you, you die. If you have 2 or 3 live neighbors, you live. If you have more than 3 live neighbors, you die. And then cells can basically come into existence if there's nothing there, and now there are 3 live cells around it. Those are the 4 rules. You can basically compute this by hand. I've done this with high schoolers before in Tokyo. We did it literally like on a board. Pretty simple. Now, why is this interesting? Well, there's a good, I would say now, we are approaching 20 years, more than 15, I guess. Almost 20 years of research by Randall Beer to try and understand some systems within this game of life from, through the lenses of, say, cognitive science, through the lenses of biology, through the lenses of, agency. As Nick mentioned before, Randall Beer, I think, is very careful in not making commitments about, oh, this is life. No, I think he's very carefully writes very well and very carefully that what he's interested in is, modeling this kind of work. But I think, it is something very much worth mentioning. So he spent particularly a lot of time studying this system, the glider. So the glider is this thing that you can see here, just moving around. It's basically this shape. You can see it starts in this position, and then it moves down, say, diagonally, and just reverses direction. And then it moves down one more, and then it changes shape, and then it changes shape once again. And then, yeah, it's pretty neat. Like, this is basically the life cycle of a glider. Say k equals 5, it goes back to the previous state, just, slide it down on the diagonal. So it looks like something is moving. Now we might want to ask whether that is, something we're interested in, but, I would say we should. Like, this thing actually emerges from, the basic rules of this game of life, from the physics, in a sense, of this game of life, and it's stable. Like, it moves around, and as long as, it follows certain rules, and I will talk about that in the next slide, it's stable. It will keep on going forever. So we are interested in understanding how some of these patterns actually are stable, and whether we should be interested in them as agents. Randall Beer studied, I guess, something about these systems, in particular, the cognitive domain of these systems. Now, cognition is a very strong word. I think Nick, spent quite a lot of time on this, so I will not go too much into the details of it. But this is something that comes from the Maturana and Varela kind of understanding of autopoiesis. So, what is the cognitive domain? Well, it's the set of all interactions in which an entity can participate without loss of identity. So I want to check all of the possible interactions between an entity and its environment, and the cognitive domain is when it doesn't die. How do we do that with this glider? Well, Randall Beer basically looked at the surrounding cells of this glider. So, as I mentioned, basically this is 2 states. There are 2 states the glider can be in, plus rotations. Now, he was able actually to show that the rotations do not affect whether it dies or not, as long as you rotate the agent and the environment at the same time. It's basically like chirality. So we can study the 2 states of this glider. And how do we do that? Well, we're going to look at all of the cells around the glider, and there are 24 cells. So it's 2 to the power of 24 states that we can have around the glider. So it could be, each one of these cells could be on or off. And now I want to consider all of the possible combinations of on and off around this glider. So that's around 16 million and something. So determine that the glider is essentially just 2 states because it's invariant to rotations. Look at all of the perturbations. And then we see that in one state, it dies 95% of the times, and the other state 99% of the times. Point something. Then we only consider the perturbations under which it doesn't die, and we call that the cognitive domain of this glider. And then we start looking, say, at how to extend this spatially. So we now want to start looking at the cells around the cells that I just considered. So now I only consider 24 cells around the glider. Now I want to consider the cells around the 24 cells, which of course, makes it much harder, but it's something that can be done. And then I want to see how much these perturbations affect the glider temporally. So instead of just looking at whether, I apply a perturbation and whether the glider dies or not in the next state, I want to see, okay, if I apply perturbation now, will the glider ever die? So will it ever disappear? It could be 2 steps, could be 3 steps, could be 100 steps. And we just want to see, say, all of the possible perturbations that actually can affect this system. Now, what does this tell us? Well, it's very hard, I guess, to condense like 20 years of research that I believe is actually really amazing. But I would say now we have a system we are looking at, say, this glider. I would say potentially has a goal to survive. You might call me crazy for that, but I would say has a goal to survive. It is adaptive because it can resist some perturbations. Not all of them, actually a really small number of them, but it can adapt to some of them. And I would say it's autonomous because actually it determines its own existence by the way it is acting. So I would say the glider in the game of life is an autonomous system. Now we have a similar development recently called Lenia. I would encourage everyone to play with this system. It's really nice. I left the link to the demo online. This is a version like it's similar to the game of life, but basically it's more. It's continuous times, continuous space, continuous state. So this is somewhat between like the game of life and the reaction diffusion systems that I showed you before. Some of the recent papers are amazing, like the complexity, the amount of different shapes that we get in this kind of universe is orders of magnitude bigger, I would say, than the game of life. And here we can start seeing things that are increasingly closer to, a cell-like system. Probably not in this video, like, this is still probably, I would say 2 years ago, but the latest development I've seen is just incredible. And we're just starting to, study this. We're still trying to map all of the possible different shapes. So, there's almost no maths being done on here. But, I truly believe this is a really interesting system. I'm a little bit more, careful here in mapping this because I'm telling you, Lenia might have some shapes that are autonomous. Since there's not much formal work being done here, I'm leaving that with a question mark. Maybe it is autonomous, maybe not. I don't know. I'm a bit more skeptical about that. Now we get into, the final stages where, things, in my opinion, start getting even fuzzier than they were now. So luckily, Nick went through some of the work that I'm about to mention in the first talk already, which makes my job easier. So I will not try to explain to you minimal cognition or minimally cognitive behavior because, as you've seen, that's at least a 1 hour long, conversation. But, I will mention some example in there. This is a different line of work by Randa Beer. This is one of the agents that Nick was mentioning. So here we have an agent on one line, and the agent needs to catch circles and avoid diamonds. All it has is a bunch of sensors that can basically not recognize shapes, but they can just say whether, they are like infrared sensors. They just tell me whether there is something in front of me or not. They have slightly different orientation, but that's about it. Why am I claiming this is interesting? Well, this system inside has a network, neural network, continuous time recurrent neural network, whose weights are evolved with a goal in mind. But let's say there is no, there is no, how can I put it? I would argue this is an autonomous system in the sense that while it is not actually creating its own components, this is creating its own identity as a system that is classifying things by mimicking the process of evolution. Again, you might call this a stretch. You might say, well, this is not the same as a reaction diffusion system or a game of life glider that are actually spawning, I guess, shapes in there. But I think this preserves part of the definition of autonomy that I'm interested in. Similarly, so BS agents, I would say, forgot the most important part. These are not just autonomous, these are supposedly cognitive. Part of the thing, part of the reasons to mention minimally cognitive behavior was to say that this might actually be cognitive. So not only autonomous, but also cognitive. My bad. Another example, Suzuki-san's, previous work. So I will not go too much into detail here because, well, I would feel embarrassed if I miss like something really obvious. But this system was a system that initially was used to study autopoiesis. Once again, here we have a simulation of a kind of metabolism. We had 3 different kinds of cells, this catalyst, a link, and a substrate. And what we are interested in is basically systems that can show some level of adaptivity, of adaptation, of autonomy, and perhaps cognition. So, the role that, Keisuke partially attributed to these systems, in my opinion, in studying them as autopoietic systems is their potential as, minimally cognitive systems. Maybe it wasn't mentioned in the paper and maybe he disagrees with me, but I would say this is in the class of minimally cognitive systems. So I would put that into, say, the cognitive systems set. Now it's getting a bit messy, but hopefully, yeah, that helps by the end, like to see a bit of the spectrum of all of the things that I'm trying to cover. And one thing that I will mention is that something about Lenia might also be in there. I don't know, again, like this system is understudied as of yet, but I would say that something really cool might be also in there. Maybe also some of the game of life stuff. I suspect, I will get back to this in a second, but I suspect that there might be some shape that we still haven't studied in the game of life that actually might have something to say in there. I didn't put, say, the cognitive domain into the cognitive systems. Is slightly unintuitive, but if you read like Randa Bia's paper, it was actually pretty careful in articulating how, this notion of cognition might be a bit too stretched. If you feel like you should go in there into the cognitive systems domain, I think that's perfectly fine. I didn't feel like putting it there, but I think it would be very reasonable to think about having it there. Now, artificial life systems. I mentioned something in the game of life. Well, there are self-replicators in the game of life. They are not as well studied. But there might be self-replicators that can evolve and that can do some really interesting stuff in there. We still don't know as of yet. So that's why at the very beginning, I mentioned something in the game of life. We don't have a name for it. I know there is a self-replicator. We know there is a self-replicator, but that's probably not enough, I guess, to call it life. Something that might be interesting, calling life, as long as you start with, the very assumption that I put in the title, life on Titan, maybe never. I mean, this is just a conjecture for now. It's an hypothesis. So there is a lot of interest in studying life with different biochemistries. So basically, the way we understand life on Earth is water-based. We need, carbon-based components, carbon-based chemistry to understand life on Earth. That's the assumption. Well, what if life could develop with a different chemical substrate? So one of the hypotheses, there is a nice, if you go on this Wikipedia page, you can be redirected to a page with all of the hypotheses in this space. I just brought out one that I found quite interesting. Titan is a moon of Saturn, actually the biggest moon of Saturn. It has liquids on its surface. As far as I remember, that's the only other, system in our solar system that has liquids on its surface. Everything else is either frozen or just hard, solid. It's not water, it's methane and ethane. So there are hypotheses about the fact that there might be water underneath. But the interesting idea is that there are hypotheses of how, there might be some kind of life form that is methane and ethane based. Also perhaps using water, but the main substrates would actually be methane and ethane. So this is, we could put this into the class of astrobiology kind of research. The idea that there might be some other form of life, just not the life we are used to, some form of life. It might be in silico, it might be something else, but yeah, this is, say, in this case, it's biochemical, just a different substrate. How do we know that there might be life? I mean, why are people even making this hypothesis? Like, this is not completely out of nowhere. Well, the atmosphere for one, there is this moon has an atmosphere, and this atmosphere is pretty active, and it has concentrations of certain chemicals that are very atypical for the type of, say, surface that this planet shows. So there is some, there is probably some chemical process at work. It might be completely unrelated to life, but some people hypothesize that there is something like a living system, a class of living systems that is actually changing the atmosphere of Titan. Anyway, so I would put Titan somewhere in there, potentially an artificial life system in the sense of life as it could be. Now it's, octopus time. I think this is almost mandatory in any, conversation about agency. Octopuses are amazing. They can solve a lot of tasks. They can solve mazes. They can recognize people. They can, I think there are even videos of them handshaking people. They can use tools. They can run. They can mimic other animals. Run as in on two tentacles. They can slide to mimic, oh God, I forgot, heavy snakes. And they can do all sorts of incredible stuff. It's just an example that I brought out for the type of life as we know it that we might be interested in, just not to focus on humans all the time. You can look it up. You can look up at this video. You can look up at all of the different things that octopuses can do. That's not the main point, I guess, at the moment. This is pretty cool. They are escaping increasingly more difficult, escape. Well, they are escaping some escaping rooms with increasing level of difficulty. Pretty cool. Octopuses somewhere in there, life as we know it, along plants, along many other things. Now, before I get to the very last point, I just want to leave a couple of ideas on the side. I didn't cover them as much as I wanted, because honestly, I wouldn't know how to cover them in this kind of, scheme. So idea number one, this is something that came out yesterday already. Somebody was mentioning how, we play football and, we are kicking the ball And then are we asking whether the ball is an agent? Are we asking whether the player is an agent? Are we asking whether the team is an agent? What are we actually asking? This is general public article that I found quite interesting. Actually, I didn't know about this, but apparently it's a very common saying for people that make beer. Brewers make wort, yeast makes beer. So the claim here, I don't know, has anyone ever made beer before? No?
It's illegal.
No? Huh?
It's illegal.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe in a company or something. Okay. Has anyone ever made wine? Is that also illegal?
I think.
Okay. Anyway, so you take like you take like the basic ingredients, you do some work on them, but then you just need to leave them there. You need to let them fermentate. And I know that best with wine. I can at least make wine. Don't know much about beer. For beer, we need yeast. And the claim here is that agency maybe lies with yeast more than it lies with brewers. So when we are actually asking, who's an agent doing something, we probably need to make sure that we draw the boundaries right. I'm not really sure where the boundaries should be. I have currently a bunch of bacteria in my stomach that are helping my digestion. Are they agents? Are they part of me being an agent? I don't know. I will just leave it there. Idea number 2. So this is a video that I recorded a few years ago in Brighton, where I also met Keisuke. This is an example of Western puppetry. We have, we like to say, hide the person behind the scenes, and we like to create the idea that this thing is an independent agent. We really like to, create the illusion. We want to give the illusion to the public that what we are looking at is actually an agent. What they are looking at is actually an agent. Well, this is a very different approach to what we see in other parts of the world. So here I bring out as an example Bunraku. Let me see if I can speed up like the, yeah. In this form of puppetry, the puppeteer is part of the show. The main puppeteer doesn't even try to hide their presence. Like they actually show their face, and in some cases, they even try to interact with the public. It is the main, say, actors are still the puppets, but there is no, attempt to really hide, the, say, shared experience of agency. We don't need to watch it all, but I just want to bring it out as an idea. I found this quote, which I think is pretty cool. Leave it there like for you to read later if you want during the discussion. But this is, I think, a good summary of the point that I was mentioning. Like in the West, we like to show strings, we like to hide our work as puppeteers behind the puppet. We want to give this illusion. We want to study agency as if it is something that belongs to a system. In the East, in many cases, there is more a tendency to see agency as a relational property, as something that is shared with the public, something that is shared with the puppeteer, something that is shared across the entire system. Now, this is also, I guess, like, giving you the summary. So the fact that, all I covered was basically a Western style approach. So, trying to find agency in a system. The point, however, is that I didn't try to tell you where agency is. So now what I'm asking to you is, to help me, like actually help me. Like, I don't know where to draw agency. So I think I'm ready to say that life probably, I would say living systems are agents. Maybe, yeah, all types of living systems, maybe the ones that we haven't discovered yet. I would say systems in general are not agents. Systems with goals, probably not agents. And then I don't know. Cognitive systems, do we need cognition for agency? Can we have it without? Do we want to consider all cognitive systems as agents or not? Some people are very happy to say, look, what governor, amazing, that's my agent. You know, I didn't have to make it autonomous in the sense of, you know, defining its own identity. It just has goals, it takes some actions. I'm happy with that. So where is it? Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. So, as in the morning, so we're gonna move on immediately directly to the discussion session.
I will send this right now, by the way.
So yeah, group 2, 3, and 4 this side, and group 5 this side.
Yeah.
Start discussing whenever you're ready.